When I was first paralysed, I found it really hard to be sitting down. I'm not very tall anyway, but suddenly being 4 foot is difficult and you have to look up to speak to everyone. I've actually married a man who's 6'3" or so I have that all the time, but that's hard. Always being sitting down and being in environments like pubs or bars or places where people are standing can be quite difficult. So when you're in hospital with a spinal cord injury, it's tough because you're suddenly in hospital for a long length of time. You have to kind of reassess your body image because you do look different because you're sitting down, and your body looks different because some of it doesn't function normally. So things like what to wear and how you feel about the way you look, and suddenly becoming a wheelchair user is incredibly difficult to start with. But you learn that and it becomes okay actually in time. You have to learn lots of wheelchair skills. So you're in a wheelchair and that may look easy, but actually you have to gradually build up your skill base. And even just going over small ridges like going onto a carpet from a smooth floor, you have to slightly modify the way you push, or going down curbs, in and out of houses, over thresholds. There are up and down steps, all of these things. It's really important to learn all of these things because you are so free when you're able to do everything. And you realise that actually, yeah, there's a step there, but it's doable, and therefore it's not scary. But before you learn those skills, it's terrifying to think that you might fall out of the wheelchair. You will fall out of the wheelchair at times. You have to learn to get back in it, whether that's asking other people to help you in the right way or just doing it yourself. Transferring in and out of the wheelchair onto the bed, the toilet, the bath seat or whatever. There are heaps of skills that you have to learn, and the physiotherapists are brilliant at teaching you many of them, and then there are other charities that support you, and there are other ways you can learn those skills, but that's tough. Being in hospital, you're surrounded by people who've had spinal injuries if you're lucky enough to be in a spinal unit, and that can be brilliant because you have a kind of camaraderie and there's a lot of banter and chat, and that's helps you get through the difficult days, I think. I think you have to learn to accept help and how to ask for help, which can be really challenging, especially when the family is involved, because it can feel, suddenly your relationships might feel like they change because your mum or whoever always wants to step in and help. So I remember going, no mum, I'll ask you when I want help. I know her heart's in the right place and she wants to help, but often I've had to develop that. I've had to kind of train her a little bit. My take is that I've broken my body, but also my mind, I'll take any support I can get to help deal with it mentally as well, because that's been a challenge. But also meeting other people in a similar boat, I think, is really helpful. Whatever your situation is, if you're recently divorced or you have cancer or you have some other challenge, then having support from people who can actually understand can be huge. And with wheelchairs, actually, it can be really helpful because you learn tips. You might watch how someone gets in the car and dismantles their chair, or which may be slightly different to how you do it, or whatever. You see other pieces of kit that people have and you think, that's good, that's clever, or the way they carry things, whatever. Psychologically also, I have some issues with pain and weird sensations because I've broken my back and affected the nerves, and therefore I have some what they call neurological pain, which I've been fortunate enough to be able to deal with myself without taking much in the way of drugs. So I think mentally I've kind of trained myself to not think about certain feelings. It's hard talking about pain because some people have such big pain issues, and I'm pretty fortunate. And therefore I'm able to not take drugs, and lots of people do have to take drugs, but I've been lucky, and I do a lot of mindfulness and meditation and yoga and things which also help with that, and sport, which is great for pain. So when I was in hospital learning to do transfers, in the beginning I used a slidey board, which is basically a board that you put under your bum and onto the platform, the bed or whatever that you're getting onto, and then you kind of shuffle across. I used one of them, and again in pregnancy I used one of them when I was so heavy with an enormous bump. I guess the wheelchair is the most important bit of kit, and you learn how to use it. Again, you learn the wheelchair skills, and without the wheelchair I'm really stuck. So I'd lived in Japan for a year before I became paralysed and not driven. Then I broke my back, came back to Stoke Mandeville, and was thinking about driving again. And you use a thing called a hand control. So I drive an automatic or semi-automatic car with a hand control. So you push usually to brake and pull to accelerate whilst driving. I remember when I first became paralysed, feeling really proud of myself the first time I got the train down to London to go out with my mates, and just feeling super independent. You have to book rail assistance, and they prefer you to do it 24 hours in advance, and it's not foolproof, but they basically put a ramp and you go up the ramp onto the train and then you travel, and it's usually fine as long as they're there and they get you off at the other end. How easy do I find it to cook or clean? Well, cleaning I'd mostly rather avoid. I don't know if you should say that. Obviously I do clean. My house isn't adapted at all, so that is a limitation and a bit of a challenge. And I find, I might cook some potatoes, but then realise that I haven't actually I can't see in the saucepan, so it's really annoying. Sometimes you can't see what you're cooking, or you accidentally strain them and then realise you've left a few potatoes in the saucepan, or things like that. In an adapted kitchen, I can cook anything within reason. I'm not going on MasterChef, but it's fine, but it is a bit limited. Currently, my sink I can't get my knees underneath it, so to wash up it's awkward because you have to turn around. It's just an excuse not to do it, really. It's hard for me because the oven is at a normal height, and therefore the pans are too heavy to lift in and out of the oven while I balance. I have to hold on basically while I'm cooking and things, so or while I'm trying to lift things in and out, and that's awkward. Being pregnant was pretty challenging as a wheelchair user. I'd already had a miscarriage, so I was quite nervous about the fact that it might work out okay in the end. I just felt so disabled. So I went from not really feeling at all disabled, because I'm quite able and I have the right kit to be able to do everything I want to do, to suddenly being in more pain and more discomfort and having less good balance, and having this lump which grew and became enormous. So my baby was 10.8 in the end, and I'm quite a small person, so it was just full on at the end. She was 2 weeks late, and I just remember anyone who's pregnant or who's been pregnant can appreciate how it feels, I think, but the wheelchair adds a whole dimension. Yeah, it was pretty hard being pregnant, but had an amazing outcome, so there we go. And I had to massively adapt my wheelchair skills because I could no longer bend forwards. I couldn't lift sort of heavy things. I couldn't really use my core, and I'm quite used to using my core a lot. I couldn't, even just leaning forwards to open a door or whatever was much more awkward because of this big bump in front of me. Obviously I could backward balance downstairs, down the odd step, but I was also nervous about, much more nervous about falling out, hurting myself or hurting the baby. So I was just much more cautious. I did pregnancy yoga throughout my pregnancy, and that was brilliant. It was really liberating, and the yoga teacher was amazing. So I still got out and got onto the floor, and then I'd put blocks. So I'd then climb up onto a block and then up into my wheelchair, and she'd help me up into my wheelchair. So that was great and lovely to be able to still do yoga and help me with the worrying about the birth and all that. I think, to be honest, after the birth, so I ended up having a C-section because the baby was so big and so late, and recovering from that was really tough. It is for anyone, but harder because of being in the wheelchair, of having to do, just doing more lateral movements, because that's what I tend to do in a wheelchair, and that's painful. And I was fortunate to be able to feel the pain from the C-section, or some of it, because I think I'd have been more concerned if I couldn't feel the pain about hurting myself. But yeah, recovering from the C-section was long and quite hard. I used a thing called a snuggle bundle, which was really good for the newborn baby. So it's basically like a kind of sheet with two little handles, and you put the baby on it, and then the baby's all cocooned into it, and you just lift it. You lift it by the handles. That was a fantastic piece of kit to start with. After I had the baby, I was in a hospital bed, and then I came home and they provided a hospital bed. So I think having an electric bed that raises up is really helpful. I also had a monkey bar thing to grab and pull myself up, which was really helpful because I couldn't use these muscles properly. And I also used a sling for the baby, so it's a way of carrying the baby. You just put a kind of stretchy sling thing around you and put the baby inside, and then I could push about, get anywhere really. And once her balance was good enough that I didn't have to use that, once she could sit on my lap, I just tie her on with a scarf. Now her balance is so good that I just sit her on my lap. I don't even tie her on most of the time. I was concerned about how I would manage having a toddler, and then I discovered this thing called a boomerang, which is brilliant, which is basically an elastic belt that you tie around yourself, and then they have an elastic belt, so they're connected to you by an elastic belt, but also by a retractable lead. So they can go away a little bit, but not too far. It's really good. Because trying to put those baby reins on a toddler and then push, you have so much movement in your arm that the rein isn't really long enough, or if it is long enough, it just gets caught up. Boomerang's brilliant. I couldn't live without the wheelchair, and I would prefer not to live without my handbike, my basketball chair, my monoski, and my car. I couldn't live without my car. I mean, obviously I could live without my car, but I prefer not to live without my car. Actually, my in-laws gave me some gardening forks and spades with long handles. You know, the little ones, but with a long handle. That's really handy for digging things up in the garden, which is my new hobby. Now I've got a house and a garden.